Welcome, everybody, back to the Traversing Life with TK podcast. I am so excited to be here for another episode. I am so grateful for everybody who's been tuning in. And those of you that have been tuning in, don't forget to share the podcast. It's available on many platforms from Spotify, iHeartRadio, Radio Public, and many more. The link is going to be in the bio from here and wherever I share it on my social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and everywhere. You'll be able to see all the different platforms that it's available. So check it out. Check out some of the older episodes. Check out my videos on the social media platforms. And hey, as I always say, you might find something out. But for today's episode, it's going to be a little bit of a broader spectrum today. Today, I want to talk about why does, truly having that acceptance of altering, philosophies, mentalities, viewpoints, perspectives, or the change in people, why does that create conflict, especially on the spiritual path? Now, this happens from many different angles, many different places, and it's happened to me personally so many times. It happens to everyone. You'll start going on your path. You'll start doing all the things that you know are right. You start getting called to doing more things, doing, as we would say, better things, things that are more aligned with your divine design, more aligned with the ways that you want to be doing things. And as that goes along, the people around you, it seems like they start to change. But if you really start to look at it, it's not that they're all changing, which they could be changing. They could be changing along with you and growing and having these different experiences. But a lot of times it's you changing your viewpoint, your perspective, the knowledge that you have, the accumulation of all your experiences have changed you. You are shifting realities. Now, I've talked about this in other videos where, there's a lot of different realities around depending on your perspective. You can shift between different realities just because of how you look at things will change your reality, your perspective, your viewpoint changes the reality around you. And that is true. It happens to everyone around us as well. So as we're changing, and we're shifting realities, the reality that they see of you is changing at the same time. Now, this might be a hard concept to actually grasp because it's so hard sometimes to really bring it into terms of you have people around you and you love them, you care for them, you think of them as family. They could be your physical family, they could be your spiritual family, they could be your very close friends that you've known for a long time. And as you start to change, you start to realize that your viewpoints don't match up. And a lot of times when you're, well, as we say, raising our consciousness, because that's what happens is we start to, not only just raise up in vibration, we start to, view things from a wider perspective. That's why people use that comparison of raising your vibration, raising your viewpoint, rising up, because you're starting to see things from a wider angle. And as we all know, the higher up you are, the more you can see, the farther out you can see. You get a wider and a further perspective on things. Now, I see this happening in spiritual communities. I've seen this happen to myself. I've seen this happen to some of my friends, some of my families. When I was younger, when I went to church, I saw it happening there. But you'll see as people start to get more aligned with their divine design or more aligned with their spiritual beliefs and start being confident in their own spiritual beliefs, and they start to leave some of the biases that they might have had just because they want to stay with the group or they want to stay with their friends or whatever it was. Once this starts to happen, it'll create conflict. It creates conflict with everybody around you. It creates conflict on the inside. And from personal experience, that can hurt. It can be so hurtful that it makes you get into this downward spiral or it makes you go out of control, go crazy, however you want to put it. But it affects you on a deep level. It affects you spiritually, mentally, and physically because now you don't want to do the same things that you wanted to do before, or you feel that maybe they weren't useful, or you start to create a negative or a harmful viewpoint or perspective on the people around you or the things that you were doing. And this is something that's going to happen. This is something that happens many a times. And this is not just in the spiritual community. This is just your friends around you, family, even your coworkers. Anytime you start to change, it's going to create conflict. Now, whether the conflict is good conflict, bad conflict, however you want to put it, helpful conflict, harmful conflict, whatever it is, there's going to be some type of conflict because they're conflicting ideas. You're starting to clash. You know, you're thinking over here, they're thinking over here. And when you come along, now it's creating that friction down here. Maybe you both want to just pass by each other. Maybe you guys want to meld together and actually get your ideas together, but it doesn't happen that way. Or it could, depending on the situation you're in. But a lot of times, this friction and this conflicts cause so much drama. They cause so much distraction on your path. We have to understand that everybody has their own perspective. Everybody has their own viewpoint. And once you start to change, you start to accept certain things, you're going to realize that you don't have the same viewpoint you had before. The people around you don't. And maybe it's time for you to move on with the next stage of your life. Or maybe it's time for you to sit down and have a conversation with these people and really get to the bottom of things. Because a lot of times people don't like to really discuss things. They want to talk over people, or they want to, just put their idea out there and be like, well, I've had this happen personally, and I've seen people say it where you're trying to talk to somebody, but it's not really a conversation, because a conversation is a back and forth where you guys build on what you were talking about. It actually builds up. You destroy those boundaries and those layers and those walls that you had against each other to build something new. But you'll see this happen, and I'll use this as an example. You'll be like, well, I was thinking about this situation, whatever situation it is. You'd be like, I was thinking about this situation this way, and this is why I felt that way. Another person would be like, well, I was thinking about the situation that way, and I wanted to do things that way. And you're like, hey, why are you going at me? I was just trying to tell you my viewpoint. And they're like, I was just trying to tell you my viewpoint. And you never really get to the bottom of the situation. You just keep arguing and keep going back and forth, saying your viewpoints, but without building on them, without creating a different type of energy. Instead of that conflict energy that's just clashing and breaking and being so, for lack of a better term, violent, even though it might not be necessarily what people think is violent, but violent as in very intense, very emotional, very deep and profound. So this conflict that you're having doesn't start to actually go away. It might actually build into something else. And now there's resentment, there's hate, there's a lot of things going on. We have to understand that when you're talking with somebody, and not just understand, you have to understand this. This is something that you have to go within to really and truly dig deep to understand and understand, because when you're talking with somebody and you want to actually get to the bottom of a conflict, you can't just both talk about your perspective. You got to talk about why those perspectives are interacting with each other, and then take it to the next step. How are we going to resolve it? How do we come to under an understanding of each other's viewpoints to build onto a whole new set of energy, a whole new vibration, a whole new frequency that you weren't at before? Because let's just say it, all it's going to do is end up breaking each other down over time. It is this one person is going to be saying theirs, you're going to be saying yours, and then a lot of times you just start getting angrier and angrier and angrier, or sadder and sadder and sadder. It's a lot of negativity, a lot of negative emotions that build off of these very intense conflicts. Now, you can alchemize this into something else by taking that next step. Now you both express that. How do you come to a resolution? There might not be an actual resolution, but there can be a way to where you both accept See how I was saying in the beginning, how a lot of times accepting different viewpoints are very crucial in conflicts, because if you guys can accept each other's viewpoints, you may not agree on them, but you can accept that, hey, that's their viewpoint. And maybe I can look at their viewpoint and see if there's any relation to my viewpoint. Is there something I can learn from their viewpoint in order to build on my viewpoint? And this is not to separate your viewpoint from their viewpoint, but it is at the same time, because you have to understand and understand and understand that everybody has their own journey. Yes, we're all on the same path, but everybody has their own journey. Everybody has their own way of under, inner, and overstanding things. Now, the beauty of that is the more perspectives that you have, the more opportunity you have to grow. I'm going to say that again. The more perspectives that you have, the more opportunities you have to grow. Only from looking at things from one viewpoint will keep you on that narrow minded path. How people say, oh, they had tunnel vision. They had tunnel vision. They couldn't see past the walls that they put up because they were so focused on one thing. Now, it's okay to have tunnel vision sometimes because you want to be focused. You want to have a goal on where you're going and what you're doing. But at the same time, if you don't take the time to look around as you go along, you miss so many things along the way. It can be hard sometimes. It can be really hard sometimes when you're going through all these different things and you're not sure exactly where to go. Now, you see your goal, but if you break down those walls, get out of that tunnel, you still have that same goal. But let's say you're in the tunnel and you were walking in the tunnel, and the only way you knew how to get to your goal was to walk. But now you broke down those walls to that tunnel. Hey, you see somebody over there. What are they doing? They're on some rollerblades. Hey, that seems kind of fun. Seems kind of cool. They're moving a little bit faster. Now, whether or not you want to move faster, that's for you to decide. But now you have another option. You're like, hey, maybe I can get some rollerblades and try it out. See how that works for me. Maybe you find out, hey, you're not that good of a skater. You're not that good of a rollerblader. That's not for you. But then there's a bike, there's a car, there's a plane, there's all kinds of different modes of transportation, different ways of getting there, different viewpoints, different modalities to get to that goal that you've been wanting, that goal that you've been striving for this whole time. And you have to break down those walls in order to see it. Now, getting back to our original subject of conflict. Now, when all these different conflicts come up in your life, we have to get away from thinking about it negatively. That bias on what these conflicts bring about the bias of what these conflicts bring to us, especially the spiritual community, because a lot of their biases creates conflict. Now, I'm not going to get into the war that's going on and everything that's happening, but you can see the bias on the viewpoint creating conflict and it building up into something different. And if you don't take care of the bias, if you don't take care of that, then how can you move forward? How can both sides grow? All sides grow, because it's not just about two sides, it's about every side, about all aspects of it. Conflict is not necessarily a bad thing until it gets out of hand, until it gets to a point to where the conflict is not helping anyone. The conflict is not teaching anybody a lesson. Nobody's growing from it. It's just destruction. Conflict can create a lot of destruction. Now, destruction can lead to creation, but without the creation aspect of it, you just keep breaking down and breaking down and breaking down. And this is where hate, anger, sadness, depression, schizophrenia, a lot of different of these mental conditions come from. It's because you've conflicted with so many different ideas. Now, these conflicts are happening on the inside. Now, they might be happening on the outside as well, like arguments and different things like that. But most of the time, these conflicts are happening on the inside because everything that happens outside of you is a reflection of the inside. Everything that happens outside of you is a reflection on the inside. And I've said it multiple times, and you might have watched some of my videos where I talk about that. I made one video specifically about that. So check that out on my Instagram and YouTube page if you want to look at it. But when you start to see that what you're conflicting with on the outside is because it's a conflicting ideal on the inside. You have to shine that light, that flashlight on the inside of yourself to see those darker parts of yourself, what people call shadow work, working in the shadows, the unseen, in the darkness where maybe you don't want some light to shine. Maybe no light has shined there in a while. So you got to shine a light on it to see what's going on. You'll never know exactly what's happening with it. It could be something good in there. It might be something bad. It might be something helpful. It might be something harmful. But you won't know unless you go and look. You won't know unless you go and look. That is the true lesson with conflict. Conflict starts to shine lights on different parts of ourselves. And the reason why it can get so hurtful, it can get so painful, is because what it shined a light on, you weren't ready to accept, or you didn't like what you saw. And that ended up creating fear, doubt, so that you can start to limit what you're thinking because now you're afraid. You're doubting what's going on. You're so afraid of taking that next step that you miss out on the different opportunities to learn and to grow. That's all conflicts are opportunities to learn and grow because conflicts can be good, conflicts can be bad, so there's multiple ways of looking at this. And when you truly start to understand that you changing might have caused that conflict, you're taking that responsibility. You're accepting the change. Because a lot of times friendships break up, relationships break up because you don't accept the change. Yes, you realize that you changed. You recognize that you have changed. But what is recognition without acceptance? Now, I'm not saying that after you accept the change, that you don't go and try to change again, try to alchemize the situation even more in order to grow and become your truest self after that. But you'll never be able to if you don't accept where you are. The destruction leading to creation, destroying the old viewpoint of yourself in order to have a new viewpoint of yourself, building up that new personality, building up that new charisma, building up that new energy, that new perspective, that new you. You got to destroy the old you to get the new you. You'll never get anywhere new doing the same things. Get rid of those old mentalities. Get rid of them old thoughts. Move forward because it's time to move forward. It's time to keep going. I'm not sure exactly who's supposed to hear this, but it's time to move forward. Accept where you are now. That person who you were 4 or 5 years ago, that person's gone. The person who you are now, that's who you are. Accept it. Love it. You don't have to think that everything about yourself is so wonderful, but you got to love who you are in order to grow. You have to accept who you are in order to grow. In order to build up on something, you have to accept the foundation, lay a foundation down. This is the foundation where you're at. And now you're going to build up from there. Now, later on, you might destroy the whole structure in order to lay a new foundation, make a new structure, get some new energy in, some new perspectives, some new ideas. that conflict that you have within yourself is a root of a lot of problems. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. I've personally been in there. I see it happen all the time. If you look around yourself, you'll see a lot of different conflict going on. Now, what are the people doing about the conflict is the thing. Now, don't get too caught up on it. Don't get too caught up on what other people are doing, because that's where people mess up. You start getting caught up on what other people are doing. And once you start getting caught up in what other people are doing, you forget to look at the inside. That's another issue with conflict. When you start to notice different conflicts going on, it's like a little trigger because it's part of human nature. It's part of this system. It's been designed in the system and programmed in us now. Now, way back when, in older times, this might not have necessarily been the case. And if you know, you know. But it's now a program that we get triggered. Once we see conflict, now we start paying attention to conflict. We're looking at all the other conflict. But are we focusing on the conflict that we need to? The conflict on the inside? Because, yeah, you can say, oh, well, this person's doing this and that person's doing that, and that's ridiculous and all that. But really, at the end of the day, is that helping you? Is that making you become the truest form of yourself? Is that helping you to grow? Now, you might get a lesson from it, but if you're so focused just on the conflict of others instead of the lesson behind the conflict that you will see, because things outside of ourselves are a reflection of what's on the inside. So if we can take the lessons that we see, truly see with our third eye, with our spiritual eye, with our metaphysical senses, because it's not just about seeing, it's about feeling, hearing, everything, all the senses, tasting, smelling, touching, all of it metaphysically, maybe even physically. But taking all this in, getting all those different information and putting it together and learning, because it's a lesson. This is the material that's out here for us. This material is for us to learn and grow. This is the material to make things better for ourselves. This is the material to reference when we are trying to learn and grow. When you're in school and you're learning a subject and you're getting the information from the teacher, and they give you the books, they give you all the information and everything. Now, unless you're tapped in on a deeper level to the subconscious and all these different things, then really and truly, if you throw that information away, if you're like, oh yeah, I know they gave me all this stuff to be able to study and everything, and I wasn't listening to what they were saying, but I had this information, I just threw it away. What's the likelihood of you actually learning the lesson? What's the likelihood of you grasping the material? I'm not saying it's for a test. Grasping the material, because it might not even be for this situation. This material might not even be used for years and years and years. It might be used in the next second. You never know. There's so much information around us and so much material for us to learn and grow, to pass these tests, so to speak, to get the lessons, because that's the best way of putting it. Instead of saying passing a test, no, to get the lesson, because the lesson is to help you experience. If you think about what a test is, it's just to understand the experience. Did you understand your experience that you went through? Did you understand the experience of the information? The lesson was the experience. So did you get it? Did you learn it? Did you incorporate it? Come on now, people. It's about time that people start to wake up to this stuff. When people talk about, oh, we have this awakening, we're having our spiritual awakening. Well, that's part of it. Stop putting all that stuff to the side. It's time to wake up. It's time to truly wake up. And when I say wake up, I mean get moving, get moving, get in motion. Energy is always in motion. That's why you have to keep pushing, keep going forward. Maybe you got to fall backwards. Maybe you got to get up. Maybe you got to fall down in order to move somewhere else. Roll over, hop, skip, jump. However, you got to do it. But that's up to you. You have to stay in motion. You have to keep moving forward in what you are learning. All these experiences are to help you deal with those conflicts. Because no matter where you are in life, no matter how spiritual you say you are or you are, no matter how enlightened you say you are or not, however it is, there's always going to be conflicts. There's conflicts in every moment because that's how you learn. That's how you grow. My last podcast, I was talking with Brett, and before the podcast came on, we were talking about religions and spiritual groups and stuff like that. And we was talking about how. Oh, 1 second, I'm gonna drink some water. But we were talking about how a lot of spiritual groups and religions create an enemy. They create that opposing factor, and it's not even that it's an enemy. It's an opposing factor, just like light and dark, white and black. All these things are just different sides of the same spectrum. How do you know what is light without experiencing the dark? How do you know what is dark without experiencing the light? So, a lot of these religions, if you get down to the root of it, it's not that they had to have an enemy. They were using that as a tool to sharpen their intuition, to sharpen their perception, their perspective. Because now you have an opposing thought. You're like, how does that verify what I believe in? Because without that opposing thought, how are you going to verify what you're thinking? How are you verifying what you experience? Because you can see the changes between what you're doing and what somebody else is doing. You can experience the changes between what you're doing and what somebody else is doing. Now, these changes could have many a different effect. Because as I said in the beginning, a lot of time change can instigate conflict because it brings up that bias. When people talk about the ego, it's just that contrasting idea. Now, there's other things about the ego that are there for a purpose, but most of the time when they talk about the ego negatively, let me put it that way. When people talk about the ego negatively, it's because it's that conflicting or contrasting ideal, that contrasting idea, that contrasting thought. But if you didn't have that contrasting thought, would it make you think more about what you're doing? Would it make you actually review the lessons that you had? Everything happens for a reason. The more I go on my spiritual path, the more I understand that. And there really is no better way to describe it than everything happens for a reason. Because everything that you do creates a lesson and opportunity. Let's say that you don't believe in divine design or a grand plan for everything. Even still, every experience that you have molds who you are at that moment in time. So every experience that you had happened for a reason. It made you who you are. That was the reason it happened, to bring you to where you are right now. It doesn't have to be some big main, scheme, some big plan if you don't want to think about it that way. At the most basic thought of it is every single action is to bring you where you are now. You don't have to bring religion into it. You don't have to bring spirituality into it, but that is a fact. Every experience that you have is to bring you where you are now. Whether or not you want to be exactly where you are, that's a whole different conversation. But it brought you here. It's made you who you are right now. So you can't discount these conflicts. You can't discount, these different experiences that you have, because that's what happens. And bringing it back to conflicts, there's ways that you can, quote unquote, resolve these conflicts. You have to accept them, accept the different ideas, accept that, hey, you know, you guys are different. You girls are different. You people are different. Whatever you want to say, you beings are your own being. Every being out here has their own perception and perspective of the world around them. And all these different perspectives build into that one, that all encompassing knowledge, where you start to close the gaps and you bring it all together and be grateful, grateful for the things that happen. There's nothing wrong with conflict. It helps us. The issue becomes whether or not we let those conflicts rule over us, whether or not we let the conflict have control. Because the conflict is just a tool. The conflict is just one part of the lesson, but it's not the whole lesson. It's not the whole experience. Now, it might be the trigger to the whole thing, but then that's just a trigger. What about all the other stuff that happened in order to build it up to that point? So we all have to understand this. We all have to know and truly know. And it's not even knowing, it's having that understanding, that overstanding. Because once you start saying what you know, you're starting to limit yourself again. Conflict is bias. Put that out there. Conflict is bias. Plain and simple. Getting rid of these biases along your journey. Now, they're going to come up. You're going to have bias with different things. You're going to have bias in your understanding. But taking the time to rid yourself of these biases, rid yourself of these conflicts as they come up, because new ones are going to come along after you start understanding things. There's always going to be a different bias or conflict on your journey, because that's what helps us grow. That is a major tool of the system, if you will. Source, God, higher power, universal law, however you want to put it. It is a major tool that is used in order to bring about lessons, to bring about growth. You got to take the time to see it. You got to take the time to really and truly go within and look at these different things. That's what this show is all about. Looking at these different perspectives and getting rid of that bias. Once you start to eliminate that stuff, things start to change. They start to change for the better. You may be thinking that, whatever's going on is hindering you in your path right now, but the more you experience, the more you start to take away some of that bias, you start to learn more from it. You start to gain more from it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you have to be able to accept when these things happen, accept that there's things going on. See, there's always going to be those things that come up that try to distract you. Like my dog is barking right now, somebody's doing the delivery. And you have to be able to push through these things. You have to be able to push through and see that, hey, this is just one part of the journey. It's something that's happening around us. It's not necessarily everything that's happening. See, now I could have been like, oh, that ruined my video, that ruined the podcast. But why? It's just another experience that we had along the way. It's just another experience in order to grow. It's just another experience to understand what draws your attention. Another experience to see how you can grow. How can I stop, that from not affecting me when I'm recording? That's one of the lessons I just got. Just because something is going on doesn't mean that I have to let it hinder me, let it stop exactly what's happening. We can just keep going forward. We can keep going on. These are little lessons that happen throughout the day. These little conflicts, these little biases that you have, resolving them as they come up. They're going to continue to come up. They're going to continue to change. That's just plain and simple. It's going to keep happening. Now, whether or not you let it affect you to the point where you can't do what you need to do, you let it affect you to the point where you're not sure exactly what you're supposed to be doing, now that's when you have to do some deeper research. You have to do some more work. And I know a lot of people want to talk about how when you say you got to put in the work, you got to put in the effort, and they're like, well, if everything is going according to divine design, if you could manifest things and you could do all this, then why do you have to put in the effort? Because of the energy. When you say everything is energy and you build off of the energy, you have to put the energy into what you're doing in order to actually grow. Nothing is going to happen if you don't put any energy into it. That's the work. That's the effort. And the conflict of ideas of how much energy to put into it. What type of energy, meaning what things do you need to do in order to make it happen? How much of it do you need to do? A different type of conflict, different type of bias, because you might think maybe if I do it this way, it's better than that way, or doing it another way is better than that way. All of these are biases and conflicts that are there to serve us to look deeper. You have to look deeper. And some people are like, wouldn't it be exhausting or tiring to look at things from the deeper perspective all the time? I'm not saying that you have to look at it all the time from that perspective. Now, there will come a time where you will start to see things on that level a lot of the time. I'm not going to say all the time because there's always going to be times where your perception is blocked off or you block it off. You don't want to see things. You don't want to be aware of certain things because of fear and doubt, bias and conflict. These are all similar terms, and they're just terms. The bias of what a word means. Language. Language is one of the biggest biases out there. Because you can't communicate with me in the same way I communicate, then we are different. We can't get along. Now, You can get a lesson from everything. Put that out there. You can get a lesson from anything. When I was talking to Brett, he was saying, sometimes he might read the Bible and get a lesson from it. Somebody else might read the Bible and be like, oh, that's just gobbledygook. That's, saying that's all jibber jabber gibberish or whatever it is. But there's lessons in everything depending on how you look at it. How in the Bible where it talks about how God made everybody speak a different language. And that caused conflict because people didn't know how to communicate with each other. It caused separation. It caused biases that are still going on to this day, if you want to say that that is fact or not. But if you look at the lesson behind that, let's give everybody a different language. Let's see if they can still come together. Let's see if they can get rid of that bias of not being able to communicate verbally and move past it. How are they going to move past it? What direction are they going to go? These are all questions that come up when you look at that. There's multiple lessons in that. There's multiple conflicts that happen because of that. There's multiple biases that happen when you think about that. There's multiple fears and doubts that got brought up because of that idea. These are all the underlying factors of disagreement, underlying factors of people moving away from each other, people not being able to come to a consensus. It might be people that you are so close to, you guys feel that you have the exact same ideas, that you have the exact same beliefs, you guys do the exact same practices. But then you start to get rid of some of that bias. You start to take that as a way to grow. Start looking at it from a wider perspective. Stop limiting yourself to those same beliefs and practices and watch how the conflicts arise. It happens every time. Now, it could be a good conflict, it could be a bad conflict, if you want to look at it from those terms. I say those terms because that's how most people look at it, as good and bad, as a happy or a terrible experience. But really and truly, it's just a different lesson to learn. How are you going to interact now that things have changed? Can you still interact with that person? Now, I'm not saying are you going to interact with them in the same way, but can you still interact with them after something like that happens? That's a big test if you want to look at it as a test, or it's a major lesson. It's a major experience on how are you going to go out here and maneuver through this system? How are you going to traverse through this life with these different biases? A lot of people say they want to travel the world. They want to experience these different cultures, experience these different things that go on in other places of the world. That is beautiful to me. Some people say it's crazy. I think it's so beautiful because you get to experience so many different things. The issue that can be brought up with that is when you have this beautiful experience, if you bring in that bias, that fear, that doubt, what really happens? Are you able to see what's coming from that? Are you able to move past it in order to truly have the experience that you say you want? These can be rough, things can be hard, but are you willing to go through it? Are you willing to see the changes that happen from getting rid of those biases, getting rid of some of those fears, and doubts, changing those conflicts to opportunities. And this is where you can get rid of the bias that even as I'm talking, see, lessons happen all the time. See, as I'm talking right now, a bias is saying, oh, these terms and how they work. That's the bias of saying, hey, sometimes these terms are needed. Sometimes these terms help us out. Every single thing can be used as a lesson to widen your perspective. Get rid of the biases. Get rid of the limiting beliefs. And even that, see, as I talk with you guys and I go through all these different things, I am receiving lessons as well. Everybody is constantly growing. Sometimes you might have to have a limiting viewpoint. You might have to have that biased viewpoint. You know why? Because that's what's going to get you to learn the lesson. How are you going to be able to see the bigger picture after, unless you've seen the smaller picture? You think that you're seeing the bigger picture of everything. You're accepting everything. But are you limiting yourself to just one viewpoint? Are you limiting yourself to just this one side? Maybe you have to take some time to live within the limits to see where you can change, where you can break out of it, where you can grow. What can you learn from it? Everything is a lesson. Everything is a new experience. Take that time to truly learn. Go within. There's nothing wrong with going within. There's nothing wrong with going inside and seeing. There's nothing wrong with shining a light on different things. Maybe taking a spotlight off of some things because now you just got a spotlight on one thing and now you're focusing on that. When you need to let that go. What you were shining the light on, maybe it's not even important. It had its purpose. Now it's time to move on. These are all different ways to break out of bias. Resolve that conflict inside. Because even as I'm talking now and putting out these ideals, I'm releasing some of those biases. I'm getting rid of some of those conflicts within myself that stop me from moving on to a better version of myself as far as my perspective. Learning more, accepting more, loving more, seeing so much more that is out there for us. We have to move past these biases, conflicts, fears, and doubts. By moving past all of this, we see so much more. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to get to a point, and I'm also saying that you're not going to get there. But I'm not saying that you're going to get to a point where this stuff, is inconsequential. Like you don't matter, it doesn't matter, and you're seeing things from such a high perspective because we also have to remember that we are in these physical bodies and we're having this physical experience. So sometimes, like I was saying, putting those limits, like confining ourselves to this physical body for a while, helps us to learn, helps us to grow. There's so much out here for us to learn. There's so much out here for us to experience. There's so much beauty in this world. And when I say beauty, I'm not just talking about things that people would say are visually beautiful or visually good, if you want to put it that way. I'm saying the beauty is everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, the bright side of society, the ugly, the horrible side of society. upper world, the underworld, the middle world, all the different planes of existence, all the different realms. There is so much out here. And the experience of actually going through all this stuff is beautiful. If you look at plants, if you look at a rose, people talk about how a rose is so beautiful to represent so many things. That rose seed had to be planted in the dirt. It had to be in the dirt, the mud, the dirtiness. And it gets watered by the different experiences. It starts to break out, starts to experience the struggles of fighting for different nutrients, breaking out of the seed, breaking out of that shell to experience something new, growing, going through the seasons, going through different temperatures and weathers and conditions. And what does it grow into? Something that people say are beautiful, something that people say is visually stunning. But it had to experience all these different things. Take a lesson from everything that's around you. Even the conflicts that you go through, they might suck. They might be horrible. You might not like them. But take some time to see exactly what it's trying to show you. And how can you use it? Every tool and lesson out here can be used by yourself in order to grow and learn and experience more. I I don't know what else to say about it, you know? I mean, obviously there's a lot more I could say, but move past the bias. Move past the conflict. Use it as that springboard. When we talk about raising up and rising up, that's like a trampoline that's gonna we jump on it, boom, bounces us up. But now there's a different platform that we can land on. Now, sometimes you miss the platform and you fall. That's okay. Because now you're like, how do I jump on it next time? How do I learn from that? And go to the next one. And when you're on that platform, guess what? There might be another trampoline, a different springboard, a different thing that you have to go through, a different conflict to learn from, a different bias to move past, a different fear to grow out of, a different fear to move past, a different doubt to release. All these things are what leads to the beauty of the journey. So take your time, really, truly, take your time. And I know I went through a bunch of different things in this podcast. I went through a lot of different subjects, but it was all based off of conflict and doubt because this encompasses so much. So take some time, maybe re-listen to this a couple different times. Get some more information. Go out there, do some more research, do some more inner search, then come back and look at it again. Maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't. That's up to you. That's on your journey. But hey, you just might find something out.